as far as I'm concerned, there's always a possibility of it being solved. And I believe that then, and I believe that now. And I think that what the Caldwell police are doing now gives it as good a chance as any.
Now, when you retired, was there any sort of frustration that this never was closed while you were on because you were there that night?
Oh, there's always been that frustration. I was telling him that some cases stick with you. And this is one that's always stuck in my craw. I remember it very clearly because it's one that got away, that we didn't get solved. And yeah, 27 years later, I hope it gets solved.
What are some of the things from that night that really stick out?
Probably the major thing that sticks out was that how blatantly he was murdered. He was shot at least 6 times. And that speaks a lot about the suspect. Our initial thought that it was a robbery, and it was not. And so the main thing that I think of is he died a gruesome death. He was dead right quickly, but he died a gruesome death. Somebody wanted him dead.
And you know what I thought was interesting am I okay standing here?
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting was that his car was kind of parked along here. Is that right?
Correct.
Is this kind of the area?
Yeah, there was diagonal parking along this side, and he came out of the store to his car and actually got to his car because the door was open. Things that he were carrying were laid on the seat of the car. And then he wound up over by this laundromat where he was killed. How and why he got from there to there, the only speculation is that the shooter took him there. Because there's no other explanation for it.
How often do you think of this case?
Oh, I've thought of it often. Yeah, over the years I've thought of it often.
Now, you live in Caldwell, right?
No, I live in Boise now.
You live in Boise, but I'm sure you come to Caldwell. What's it like when you pass this
I
area?
think about it. Yeah, I think about it. It's in conversation with people, it's a story I've told. It's one that got away. Of all the homicides I worked in, I started in 1965, and all the homicides I worked in all those years, this is one that didn't get solved.
And that night, from what the police told me, and you'll know the best, there was a sketch.
Right, a crime scene sketch.
So how did that come about? Did witnesses see? I mean, talk to me about that night and what happened. You got called to the case. Start there.
Well, there were some people that found the body. There were witnesses over here in the parking lot that heard the shots and actually saw some muzzle flash over in this area. That got their attention. But there were some people that walked by and found the body, and they came over and got some other people, and ultimately they reported it to the police department, and we responded. We know that he checked out just a few minutes after midnight. It was reported about 10:20, something in that area. But we think he was probably shot around 10 minutes after midnight. So it's 12:20, not 10:20. But, you know, our initial response out here was, as in all cases, is containment, identify witnesses, identify crime scene and contain that crime scene, and then begin the task of identifying and gathering evidence.
And from what I understand, not a lot of evidence in this case.
As far as the shooting itself or who, no. But we did find projectiles, bullets, some of them under the body. And so we have those as evidence. And I really believe that if we ever find the gun, we can identify it as the weapon that killed him. But beyond that, no, there wasn't a lot of evidence. And so from that point on, you just start with the victim and looking into his background, looking if there's anybody close to him that would want this, and focus as much as you can on what information you got from the witnesses, and start from the body and move out.
Now, when you spoke with the family, in all of your research, did you find that anyone maybe wanted this man dead?
As far as the family's concerned, no, we didn't identify any specific suspects. Okay, we had some leads, but we didn't identify any specific suspects. We had speculation. I'll go that far.
Okay.
But as far as specific suspect, I'm not going to do that now. Wouldn't discuss that even if I knew, because we don't want to release that.
But you do believe that this wasn't, when I initially heard this case, I thought maybe this was a passer-through. This was a crime, but you think, and I mean the chief has said that they believe this is someone who may still be in the community. Is that what you
It's
believe?
possible. Very, very likely, yes. And the major thing that sticks out in my mind, the man was shot 6 times. And that's just not a passerby. That's not a random homicide. So I think it's very possible those people are still in the community, and that's why I give it the possibility of being solved.
Well, we spoke about witnesses, and you said there were some people who found the body and they went and got others. Were there a lot of witnesses in this case, but no one?
Yes, and in the parking lot there were a lot of kids hanging out there, and I think we probably interviewed a dozen or more. That some of them knew they were gunshots, some of them thought possibly firecrackers. Others that looked over actually saw muzzle flash. And so we had a lot of witnesses, but nobody that could walk up and say, that's the guy.
Gosh, how does that make you feel when you're on a case like
That's
this?
frustrating. That's frustrating because you've got a lot of beating the pavement, racking your brain, doing everything you can to find out who did this. And it's very frustrating because you don't have someone that can stand him up in a lineup and say, that's the guy.
Will you take me over to where the body was found?
Sure.
So how long have you been retired?
2 years. Going
so you're
on.
fresh out.
Going on 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you miss it?
Hell yes.
You sound like my dad. My dad's like that too.
I'll wear a badge to the grave.
That's what my dad says.
Yeah. Now the exact location, I can't give you the exact location. I know it was in this general area. Okay, now things have changed to some degree. The street's been widened, but it was in this general area. I can tell you that the victim would be standing where you are generally. I mean, in relationship to the suspect, because the cone of fire was like this out here. We found some rounds out along the street, expended jackets. They were jacketed, brass jacketed rounds. And so we found those out there, so we know the cone of fire was this direction, the suspect on this side, him standing there.
Now, I heard that, being shot 6 times, was it at close range? And
Beg pardon?
Was it at close range that these shots
Oh,
were?
yes, yeah.
And I think the chief had mentioned that the ground was angled.
Yeah, some of it, it's difficult in some ways to tell what rounds were first and which were not. His left earlobe was shot off. He was shot on the left arm. He was shot after he was down. When we rolled the body, there were 2 expended slugs underneath of him. One went through his left lung, one went through his left ventricle of his heart, and then he was shot twice in the head.
Now, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
to get those when you turn the body over and you find those slugs, does that mean someone would have had to shoot?
Standing over the body. And one of the witnesses told us that's what he saw. A person standing over the body and firing down into the body. And see, that's why it sticks with you, you know?
I mean, seeing that, I mean, how old were you at that time? Were you a young cop?
Oh, I was in my 30s.
Right. So still young. Was that one of those...
27 years ago, so...
Well, I mean,
I was around 40.
Was that one of those murders that you just think...
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, every homicide gets you that way. And you never understand the why, but there are some of them that stand out, and this is one that stood out.
Now, did you meet the victim's family? I mean, I'm sure you had to do all of that stuff as well.
I interviewed one of the family members. A lot of the family stuff was done by another detective, and so I know what that brought to the case, but personally, I didn't do it.
What's it like knowing that you're going to a victim's family and saying, we just don't have anything?
That's really difficult.
Why?
Well, first of all, you're dealing with people who loved that person, and the simple fact that he's now deceased is difficult, but that he's been murdered and murdered in the way that he was, doubly difficult. And of course they want the case to be solved, as we do. And then you have to at some point go and say, we don't have anything. We don't have anything.
Does that weigh on your heart?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because you want to give them some kind of closure, is the term used. You want them to say, this is done, you know? They still have to live with what they lost, but at least they can say, this is done. And when you can't give that to them, that's difficult. That's difficult to do. And that's a part of what keeps it with you as well. So.
This man's wife passed away, I guess, in the last few years.
Yeah, I didn't know that until recently.
Is it, even if the case is solved today, tomorrow, in the near future, is it hard knowing we didn't get closure to one person, or we didn't get closure to the, you know what I mean? Is that something that you take with you as a retired officer?
Well, I wish that we could have done it way back then, or at a time when his wife was alive. But at this point, I want to say, we got him. And, you know, whatever those guys that are working the case now, again, I hope they get him. That will mean something to me. And hopefully for other family members of his that are still alive, it will mean something to them as well.
Is this your only unsolved case?
The only one I've ever had. All the homicides I was involved with as a detective and in uniform. It's the only unsolved one I have.
What's the missing link? What would you tell the public? I mean, it's 27 years later. You think this person still could be in the community? I mean, what do you tell people? What do you say?
Well, as I said before, I think it's a possibility that they're still in the community. And what I tell them, as far as the community is concerned, there's no threat from this person. This was specific. So this is not a random guy that's, serial killer. So there's no threat to the community. But I would like the community to know that any police department worth its salt is never going to give up. Even though we may never solve it, it's always going to be open, and we're always going to be trying. And the other thing is, if there is anybody that this person spoke to, bragged about it, or they know anything that would assist us, please go to the Caldwell Police Department and talk to them.
Do you think that's a realistic possibility?
I think that's a realistic possibility. He wouldn't. There are people who knew what happened. They know what happened, and they've never come forward. And I encourage them, I plead with them, come forward. Help us solve this case so that Gary Johnson's death doesn't go unsolved. Gary Johnson's death should not go unsolved.
Do you believe people are protecting the person who did this?
I don't know. I don't know. I just think there are people who probably know about it and haven't said anything, for whatever reason they might have.
When you first stepped on the scene, did you think we're going to solve this? When you first arrived and you saw the situation, were you like, we're going to be able to figure this out because this was just so heinous?
Well, you think that with every case. You know, you're thinking about that when you're driving to the scene before you ever get there. I'm going to find out what happened and how we're going to solve it. Unfortunately, there are some that just doesn't work that way.
Is there anything you would have done differently, or do you think you covered every possible base?
Based on what we had at the time, I think we did what we could. I think we did what we could. You know, and to go back through the file and think over what we did and what could we have done differently, I just don't know. I don't know. One of the things that's come about since is the old unsolved case, people picking up these unsolved cases and working them. And I think that's a fantastic thing because they can solve cases 20, 30, 40 years old, homicides, because they look at it from a different perspective. They look at the evidence from a different perspective. And that's a great invention for law enforcement, to have these unsolved cases worked on. Because I think some of them, and I believe this one, can be solved.
Have you ever run into any of the witnesses or any of the, run
No.
into anyone after the case?
No, I never have.
Never
No.
dealt with any of those
No.
witnesses again? Were most of the witnesses younger? You mentioned
Yeah,
there were a lot of kids.
they were kids. Yeah, they were
Does
kids.
credibility come into fact there, or
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Their memories will probably be the same. Maybe a little hazier, but for the most part, their memories will be the same. Because this is not something you forget.